What happens when Anne Hathaway walks onto the set of The View and finds herself face to face with Whoopi Goldberg in a moment no one in the studio is prepared for? Before we dive into this explosive showdown, make sure you subscribe to Stage View right now, like this video, and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Because today's story is one you'll want to remember. The lights inside the studio feel hotter than usual that morning. The cameras glide across the polished desk. The audience is buzzing, sensing something different in the air, an undercurrent that hasn't quite surfaced yet. And steps out from backstage, her smile poised but tight around the edges. She waves gracefully, every inch the composed Oscar-winning actress the world has come to admire. But if you look closely, really closely, there's something flickering behind her eyes. Whoopi sits at the center of the table, calm, observant, hands folded. She has the quiet authority of someone who has seen decades of headlines rise and fall. The applause swells as Anne takes her seat. A polite exchange. Compliments about her latest project. A few light jokes. The rhythm of daytime television ticking along like it always does. But tension doesn't announce itself loudly. It creeps. The conversation shifts. What begins as a discussion about Hollywood pressures slowly edges into deeper waters. Public scrutiny, authenticity, the weight of image. And speaks candidly about the emotional toll of being misunderstood by the public. Her voice softens as she describes moments when she felt the world had decided who she was without asking. "I've spent years trying to prove I'm more than a headline," she says, fingers intertwined tightly in her lap. "There were days I felt like I couldn't breathe under the expectations." The audience murmurs sympathetically. Whoopi leans forward slightly. "But isn't that part of the deal?" she asks, her tone steady but firm. "When you sign up for this life, you sign up for the spotlight too." The words hang in the air. And blinks, taken aback, not by the question itself, but by the weight behind it. "I understand that," she replies carefully. "But being in the spotlight shouldn't mean you lose your humanity." A ripple moves through the crowd. The co-hosts glance at each other. Whoopi doesn't back down. "Nobody's saying you lose your humanity. But sometimes when you're presented a certain way, people respond to what they see, not what you intend." There it is. The subtle shift from conversation to confrontation. Anne's composure tightens. "Are you saying I created the narrative about me?" "I'm saying," Whoopi answers, measured and direct. "That perception is complicated. And sometimes it's not just the audience writing the story." The studio feels smaller now, the air heavier. The cameras zoom in, capturing every micro-expression. The tightening jaw, the raised eyebrow, the slight tremor in a hand resting on the table. And inhales slowly. "For a long time, I stayed silent because I thought defending myself would only make it worse. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I was kind enough, eventually the noise would fade." "And did it?" Whoopi asks. The question isn't cruel. It's probing. Anne's voice wavers just slightly. "No, it didn't." Silence spreads across the room like a held breath. Whoopi nods once. Then maybe the answer isn't about proving anything to anyone. There's wisdom in her tone, but also challenge. And hears it. The audience hears it. "You say that," and responds, emotion rising. "But it's different when you're the one being dissected." Every smile analyzed. Every word twisted. Whoopi's expression shifts, less confrontational now, more reflective. "You think I haven't been dissected?" she says quietly. "You think I don't know what it's like to be judged before you open your mouth?" The temperature in the room spikes. Anne's eyes glisten. She hadn't expected this turn. What was meant to be a discussion about her experiences has become something larger. Two powerful women from different generations confronting the cost of visibility. "I'm not minimizing your experience," Anne says quickly. "I'm just saying mine hurt." "And I'm not minimizing yours," Whoopi replies, her voice firm but not raised. "I'm saying pain isn't unique. It's universal. The question is what you do with it." A wave of applause breaks out, nervous, uncertain. And swallows. For a moment, the polished actress disappears, replaced by someone raw, vulnerable. "What if you don't know what to do with it?" she asks softly. "What if you're still figuring that out?" That lands. Whoopi studies her, really studies her. The sharp edges of the exchange begin to blur into something more complex. "Then you say that," she answers. "You say, I'm still figuring it out. But you don't let the world decide that you're a victim of it." The word victim echoes louder than expected. And straightens. "I don't see myself as a victim." "Good," Whoopi says instantly. "Then don't speak like one." Gasps flutter through the audience. For a split second, and looks stunned. Hurt flashes across her face. The room feels like it's balancing on a knife's edge. I'm speaking as someone who's been overwhelmed, and replies, her voice trembling but steadying as she continues. There's a difference. Then show that difference, Whoopi counters. Because the young people watching you, they're learning from how you frame your story. That's when something shifts inside Anne. The tears she's been holding back finally spill over, but they don't weaken her. They sharpen her. I am trying, she says, emotion fully breaking through. Do you know what it's like to wake up and feel like the world decided you're unlikable? To question every interview, every laugh, every red carpet moment? I worked myself to exhaustion trying to earn approval that was never coming. The audience is utterly silent now. Whoopi doesn't interrupt. I don't want pity, and continues. I want honesty. And the honest truth is, I lost myself for a while trying to be what everyone expected. The vulnerability is palpable. It's no longer a debate. It's a confession. Whoopi exhales slowly. Now that, she says, softer than before, is something real. The tension begins to transform, not disappearing, but evolving. The confrontation is no longer about who's right. It's about understanding. But let me ask you this, Whoopi continues gently. Why did you give them that power? And shakes her head, almost laughing through tears. Because I cared. Too much. I cared about being seen as good. As worthy. And you are, Whoopi replies without hesitation. But worthiness doesn't come from applause. The words land differently now, not as a challenge, but as a reminder. And wipes her eyes. The audience begins to clap softly, then louder, a wave of emotion sweeping across the studio. The cameras capture everything. The sheen of tears, the steady gaze between them, the unspoken acknowledgement that something significant just happened. What started as a tense exchange has become something raw and unscripted. Two women refusing to sugarcoat the realities of fame. Two generations colliding, not in anger but in truth. And yet, the atmosphere remains electric. Because even as understanding flickers between them, the emotions are still fresh, the wounds still tender. And takes a deep breath. I didn't expect this conversation, she admits. Whoopi offers the faintest smile. The best ones usually aren't expected. A small laugh breaks through the heaviness, and the audience joins in, relieved, but still aware they've witnessed something rare. But make no mistake, the moment isn't over. The energy in the room suggests that this emotional showdown has only just begun to reveal its layers. The cameras keep rolling. The world outside has no idea what's unfolding inside this studio. And as the break approaches, Anne and Whoopi sit across from each other. Not as adversaries, not as opponents, but as two forces who just collided in a way neither of them saw coming. When the show returns from commercial, nothing will feel the same. And neither will they. The red light on the camera blinks back on. The applause that usually signals a smooth return from commercial feels different now. Hesitant, charged. The audience has just witnessed something unscripted, something raw. And as the theme music fades, all eyes return to the table where Anne Hathaway and Whoopi Goldberg sit in a silence that speaks louder than any applause ever could. Anne's hands are folded in front of her, but they're no longer trembling. There's a steadiness now, a decision. Whoopi watches her, not with confrontation, but with curiosity. The rest of the co-hosts remain unusually quiet, sensing that stepping in would break something fragile that's still forming. Anne inhales. When I was younger, she begins, her voice no longer wavering but deliberate, I thought success would protect me. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I won the awards, if I did everything right, then the criticism would stop. A faint, knowing smile touches Whoopi's lips. Not smug, recognizing. But it didn't, and continues. It got louder. It got meaner. And I didn't know how to separate my work from my worth. The audience shifts in their seats. This is no longer just celebrity small talk. It's confession under studio lights. Whoopi leans forward again, her tone lower now. That's a hard lesson. Separating the two. And nods. And I didn't learn it gracefully. I tried to control everything. Every interview, every answer, every expression. I was terrified of giving people another reason to decide I was insincere. The word hangs heavy. Whoopi tilts her head slightly. Insincere, she repeats. That's the one that stuck with you. Yes, and admits instantly. Because I wasn't pretending. I was just trying. Trying too hard, maybe. But it came from a real place. A murmur of agreement ripples through the crowd. Whoopi rests her chin lightly on her hand. Sometimes when people see someone trying too hard, they don't see effort. They see calculation. The sentence lands softly but sharply, and doesn't flinch this time. I know, and that's what hurt, because it wasn't calculation. It was fear. There it is again, that word. Fear. The studio feels still, like the air itself is listening. Fear of what? Whoopi asks gently. Fear of disappearing, and answers without hesitation. Fear that if people stopped liking me, I'd stop mattering. The vulnerability draws a collective inhale from the audience. Whoopi's expression softens further. You think likability equals relevance? For a long time, yes, and says, especially for women in this industry. We're told we can be talented, but we also have to be agreeable, grateful, charming, effortless. And if we're not, we're difficult. Or fake. The words are no longer just personal, they're systemic. Whoopi nods slowly. That's not new. I know it's not, and replies quickly. And I know you faced it too. But I think I internalized it in a way that made me shrink. The audience watches the exchange like a tennis match where neither player is trying to win, only to understand. Shrinking is dangerous, Whoopi says quietly, because once you start, you forget how big you're allowed to be. That line draws applause, louder this time, and smiles faintly through lingering emotion. I forgot, she says. I forgot I was allowed to take up space without apologizing. Whoopi studies her again. So why are you telling this story now? The question isn't accusatory. It's strategic. And pauses. For a second, the polished media training seems to reappear. But then she lets it go. Because I don't want the next generation of girls watching to think they have to twist themselves into knots to be accepted, she says. I don't want them analyzing their laugh the way I analyzed mine. A few audience members nod visibly. Whoopi's voice remains calm. But you understand that when you speak publicly, it carries weight. People don't just hear your vulnerability, they hear influence. And nods. And that's why I hesitated for so long. I didn't want to sound ungrateful. I didn't want to seem like I was complaining about a life people would do anything to have. Gratitude and honesty aren't opposites, Whoopi replies firmly. That sentence hits harder than any before it. Anne's eyes widen slightly, absorbing it. You can be grateful, Whoopi continues, and still say something hurt you. The two can live in the same sentence. The audience claps again, this time in understanding, and exhales, almost relieved. I wish I'd understood that earlier. A beat passes. Then Whoopi shifts the energy again. But let me push you on something. The temperature rises once more. When you say you felt misunderstood, Whoopi says carefully, did you ever consider that maybe people weren't misunderstanding you? Maybe they were reacting to a version of you that wasn't fully formed yet. The question slices cleanly, and freezes, not offended but struck. You mean, she says slowly, that they were seeing my uncertainty? Maybe, Whoopi replies. Maybe they were seeing someone still figuring it out. And instead of embracing that, you tried to present perfection. The word perfection echoes in the studio, and looks down briefly, then back up. I did, she admits, because I thought that's what was expected. And who told you that? Whoopi presses. No one, and says after a long pause. And everyone. A ripple of understanding moves through the room. Whoopi nods once. That's the trap. We inherit expectations we were never explicitly given. The tension now is intellectual, emotional, not combative, and leans forward slightly. But here's where I struggle, she says. When the criticism became personal, when it wasn't about a performance but about my character, that's when it broke something in me. Whoopi's gaze sharpens. Criticism of character is brutal. Yes, and whispers. Because how do you defend something invisible? How do you prove you're genuine? You don't, Whoopi answers immediately. The bluntness stuns the room again. You don't prove it, Whoopi continues. You live it, over time, and you let people adjust, or not. Anne's throat tightens. But what if they never adjust? Then that's their work, Whoopi says firmly. Not yours. The audience erupts into applause, this time sustained, and blinks back fresh tears, but these feel different. Less wounded, more awakened. For a moment, neither woman speaks. The silence is no longer heavy, it's reflective. One of the co-hosts finally shifts slightly, but still doesn't interrupt. The exchange has taken on a life of its own, and straightens her shoulders. I think I spent years trying to control a narrative I couldn't control, she says. And in doing that, I lost my voice. Whoopi nods slowly. So what does your voice sound like now? The question feels like a doorway. And thinks. Really thinks. It sounds less polished, she says. Less desperate to please. More grounded. A small smile tugs at Whoopi's lips. That's growth. And lets out a soft laugh. It's messy. Growth is messy, Whoopi replies. The audience laughs lightly, tension easing, but not dissolving entirely. Because beneath the warmth, there's still an undercurrent of intensity. The world is watching. Millions at home are witnessing two powerful figures unpack vulnerability in real time. And glances briefly toward the cameras, then back at Whoopi. Can I ask you something? Whoopi gestures for her to go ahead. When you were coming up, and asks carefully, did you ever feel like you had to armor yourself to survive? Whoopi doesn't answer immediately. Her eyes drift for a split second, as if flipping through decades of memory. Yes, she says finally. Every day. The studio quiets again. But the armor can get heavy, Whoopi adds. And sometimes you forget what you're protecting. And nods slowly. That's exactly it. For the first time since the segment began, there's no pushback. No probing challenge. Just shared recognition. You're not weak for feeling hurt, Whoopi says. But you are responsible for what you build from it. The statement doesn't accuse. It empowers. And absorbs it fully. Then I want to build something better, she says. Not just for me, but for the girls who are watching this and thinking they have to be flawless to be loved. A hush settles over the audience, followed by rising applause, stronger, more unified than before. The energy in the room has transformed again. What began as a tense standoff has evolved into something layered, complicated, and deeply human. But the conversation isn't finished. Because just as the warmth begins to settle in, Whoopi shifts slightly in her chair, her expression thoughtful. There's one more thing, she says. And just like that, the room tightens once more. And looks at her, ready, but uncertain. Vulnerability is powerful, Whoopi continues. But it can also become a performance if we're not careful. The words are calm. Measured, but they reignite the spark. Anne's eyes flash, not with anger, but with resolve. Are you saying I'm performing right now? She asks quietly. The audience leans forward collectively. Whoopi meets her gaze without hesitation. I'm asking you, she says, to be sure you're not. The silence after that question feels endless. The studio lights seem harsher now, illuminating every blink, every breath. The air is thick with anticipation as Anne Hathaway holds Whoopi Goldberg's gaze across the polished table of the view. I'm asking you to be sure you're not. The words echo, not accusatory, not gentle either. Just honest. And doesn't look away. For a split second, you can almost see the calculations behind her eyes. The instinct to respond perfectly. The training. The years of red carpets, award speeches, late-night interviews where every syllable was weighed before release. But then something changes. She exhales. If I were performing, and says slowly, I'd be better at it. A ripple of nervous laughter moves through the audience, but it dies quickly. This isn't a joke. I've played characters who cry on cue, she continues, who unravel beautifully, who deliver pain in a way that looks poetic and contained. If this were a performance, it would be cleaner. Her voice cracks slightly on the last word. Whoopi watches closely, eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in concentration, and leans forward now, mirroring Whoopi's earlier posture. The truth, she says. The truth is I hate that I'm crying on national television. I hate that part of me is wondering how this will look in a headline tomorrow. There it is. The room reacts, a quiet murmur, a shifting of bodies and seats. She said the quiet part out loud. But I'm staying in it, and continues, her voice strengthening. Because for once, I don't want to manage the moment. I want to feel it. Whoopi's expression shifts again. Softer. Respectful. Managing the moment, Whoopi repeats. That's what we do in this business. Yes, and says immediately. And I've done it my entire adult life. She pauses, swallowing hard. I learned early that if I was polished enough, gracious enough, enthusiastic enough, people might not see the insecurity underneath. But they did. And they called it fake. The word lands like a stone. The audience is utterly still. Whoopi folds her hands together. So what are we seeing now? And doesn't hesitate. Someone who is tired of being afraid of your perception. The directness of it sends a current through the studio. Whoopi tilts her head slightly. My perception? Yes, and says unwavering. Yours. The media's. The audience's. I've been afraid of disappointing people I respect. That lands differently. Because this isn't just about anonymous critics anymore. It's about peers. About industry veterans. About someone like Whoopi, an EGOT-winning icon who has survived decades of scrutiny and still sits firmly in her truth. You respect me? Whoopi asks quietly. Of course I do, and replies, almost incredulous. You've built a career on saying what you believe, even when it costs you. A flicker passes over Whoopi's face, something between pride and caution. And that's not easy, and adds. It's terrifying. Whoopi lets out a small breath of laughter. It is. The audience chuckles softly, tension easing for just a moment. But here's the thing, Whoopi says, her tone shifting again, not combative but firm. Respect doesn't mean agreement, and strength doesn't mean you won't get hit. And nods. I know that now. Do you? Whoopi presses gently. Anne's jaw tightens, not defensively but thoughtfully. I'm learning, she corrects herself. There's something powerful about that correction. Not absolute, not declarative, just honest. One of the co-hosts shifts slightly, clearly feeling the weight of the exchange, but still doesn't interrupt. The audience senses they are watching something rare. Not a fight, not a meltdown, but a collision of philosophies. Let me tell you what I see, Whoopi says. The room quiets again. I see a woman who was handed the keys to a kingdom very young, Whoopi continues. And instead of just driving, she kept asking if she deserved the car. A few scattered laughs break out, but they're affectionate. And smiles faintly, eyes still glossy. You were talented, Whoopi says. You were celebrated. And instead of standing in that, you kept apologizing for it. Anne's breath catches slightly. I didn't want people to think I thought I was better than them, she says softly. Why would they? Whoopi asks. Because that's what happens, and replies, emotion rising again. Women who succeed too loudly get labeled. Arrogant. Cold. Calculating. Whoopi nods once. Sometimes. And I didn't want that, and says. So I tried to soften everything. My voice. My posture. My answers. And in softening, Whoopi says quietly, you blurred yourself. The words hit like truth always does, clean and undeniable. And doesn't argue. She nods slowly. Yes. There's a long pause. The kind that would normally terrify live television producers. But no one cuts to commercial. No one interrupts. Because this moment matters. You know what's interesting? Whoopi says after a beat. The audience can smell fear. Not because they're cruel, but because fear reads as inauthentic. And winces slightly, not from offense, but recognition. I wasn't trying to deceive anyone, she says. I know, Whoopi replies. But when you don't fully own yourself, people sense the gap. The audience murmurs in agreement, and leans back slightly, processing. So you're saying the backlash wasn't about me being fake. It was about me not being settled. Exactly, Whoopi says. The word lands like a key turning in a lock. For a moment, and looks almost stunned, as if a decade of confusion just rearranged itself into clarity. I wish someone had told me that earlier, she whispers. They probably tried, Whoopi says gently. But you weren't ready to hear it. The honesty of that draws a soft gasp. And nods again. You're right. It's not defensive. It's liberating. The energy in the room shifts yet again. Less confrontation now, more reckoning. But here's what I need to say, and adds, her voice gaining strength. Even if some of it was me not being settled, the cruelty was still real. The temperature rises slightly. Absolutely, Whoopi agrees immediately. The internet can be brutal. And it wasn't just criticism, and continues. It was mockery. It was trending topics dissecting my smile. It was strangers deciding my personality based on 10-second clips. The audience murmurs sympathetically. That messes with your head, she says. It makes you question your instincts. Whoopi nods slowly. Fame magnifies everything. The praise, the hate, the doubt, and looks directly at her. How did you survive it? The question hangs heavy. Whoopi leans back slightly, considering. I stopped trying to survive it, she says finally. I decided to outlast it. The line sends a ripple through the crowd. Outlast it, and repeats. Yes, Whoopi says. Headlines fade. Outrage cycles move on. But if you keep changing yourself every time the wind shifts, you'll never know who you are. And absorbs that like oxygen. I kept changing, she admits. Trying to anticipate the next critique. And that's exhausting, Whoopi replies. It is, and says, almost laughing through lingering tears. I was exhausted. The admission feels like release. For a moment, neither speaks. The studio feels warmer now, not tense, but charged with something deeper than drama. Then Whoopi leans in one last time. So here's my real question, she says. Not as a host, as a woman who's been in this game a long time, and meets her gaze. Who are you when you stop trying to be liked? The question lands like thunder. The audience goes silent again, utterly, completely silent. Anne's eyes widen slightly. Her breath catches. And for the first time since this emotional showdown began, she doesn't have an immediate answer. The silence after that question stretches, so long it almost becomes its own character in the room. Who are you when you stop trying to be liked? The studio lights hum faintly overhead. The audience sits frozen, leaning forward as if physically trying to hold the moment in place. Across the table on The View, Anne Hathaway stares at Whoopi Goldberg. And for the first time in this entire exchange, there is no carefully constructed sentence waiting to be delivered. Anne blinks. Her lips part slightly, then close again. The reflex to respond, to perform intelligence, vulnerability, grace, rises in her like muscle memory. But she doesn't reach for it. I don't fully know yet, she says finally. The honesty lands with a weight that no polished monologue ever could. A quiet murmur ripples through the audience, not disappointment, but recognition. Anne's shoulders relax just a fraction. For most of my life, she continues, her voice steady but unguarded, I've measured myself against reactions. Box office numbers, reviews, social media commentary, even silence. She swallows, especially silence. Whoopi's gaze doesn't waver. And if I stop trying to be liked, Anne says slowly, thinking through every word as she speaks it, then I have to be okay with being misunderstood. The room tightens again. Are you? Whoopi asks softly, and exhales through her nose, almost laughing at the impossibility of the question. I'm trying to be. The vulnerability isn't theatrical anymore. It's grounded, earned. For a long time, Anne says, I thought being misunderstood meant I had failed. Failed to communicate. Failed to present myself correctly. Failed to be enough. Her eyes glisten again, but she doesn't look away this time. But maybe, she continues, being misunderstood is just part of being human. A wave of applause rises, slow at first, then swelling, not because it's dramatic, but because it's true. Whoopi nods once firmly. Now you're talking. A faint smile breaks across Anne's face. But I don't want to swing to the other extreme, Anne adds quickly. I don't want to become hardened or indifferent. I still care. Caring isn't weakness, Whoopi replies. Needing universal approval is. That line hits like a final chord in a symphony. The audience reacts audibly, gasps applause, a few scattered hms of agreement, and absorbs it. This time, she doesn't flinch. You're right, she says. And I think I've been confusing the two. She pauses, searching inward. When you asked me if this was a performance, she continues, it stung, because part of me was afraid that it could be perceived that way. Whoopi tilts her head slightly. But is it? And shakes her head. No, it's messy. It's uncomfortable. And I don't know how it will be clipped or framed or debated later. But it's real. The cameras zoom in just slightly, capturing the quiet conviction in her face. And if tomorrow there's a headline that says I broke down on television, and adds, then fine. I'd rather break down honestly than hold it together artificially. The audience erupts into applause, louder than any point in the show so far. Whoopi leans back in her chair, folding her arms loosely, not defensive but satisfied. That, she says, is a woman who's starting to outgrow the noise. And laughs softly through tears. Starting, she emphasizes. Starting is enough, Whoopi replies. For a moment, the tension that defined the entire segment dissolves into something warmer. Not agreement on every point. Not resolution wrapped in a bow. But respect. One of the co-hosts finally jumps in, voice slightly breathless. I don't think any of us expected this conversation today. The audience laughs lightly, the shared relief palpable, and turns toward the crowd for the first time in several minutes. I didn't either, she admits. And that's when the applause rises again, because everyone in the room knows they've witnessed something unscripted, something unfiltered. The segment winds down, but the emotional current lingers. As the show cuts to its final commercial break, the cameras briefly capture Anne and Whoopi leaning toward each other, exchanging a few quiet words off mic. There's no hostility, no icy distance, just two women who challenged each other and stayed. But the real explosion happens after the credits roll. Within minutes, clips of the exchange flood social media. Short, punchy captions. Whoopi calls out and live on air. And Hathaway breaks down after tough question. The internet does what it always does. It slices a layered conversation into fragments. Some praise Whoopi for her directness. She said what needed to be said. Others rally behind Anne. Finally, she spoke her truth. Debate threads multiply. Reaction videos pop up before the afternoon is over. But something interesting happens beneath the noise. Longer clips begin circulating too. The full arc of the conversation. The nuance. The evolution. The way tension transformed into clarity. Comment sections fill not just with hot takes, but with confessions. I've been afraid of being misunderstood too. I didn't realize how much I tie my worth to being liked. This felt uncomfortably honest. By evening, major entertainment outlets are running think pieces. Not about a feud, but about vulnerability in the spotlight. About generational perspectives on fame. About the difference between authenticity and approval seeking. And in a quiet corner of her home later that night, and scrolls through some of it. The headlines sting. Of course they do. But they don't devastate. Because something shifted in that studio. She replays the moment in her mind. Whoopi's question, sharp and unyielding. Who are you when you stop trying to be liked? For the first time, it doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like a doorway. Meanwhile, Whoopi sits at her own table, reflecting. She's been in this business long enough to know that confrontation isn't cruelty when it's rooted in clarity. She didn't challenge and to embarrass her. She challenged her because she recognized something familiar, the exhausting dance of overmanagement. And the next morning, when the two cross paths briefly backstage before another taping, there's no awkwardness. And approaches first. Thank you, she says simply. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. For what? For not letting me hide. Whoopi studies her for a second, then nods. Anytime. No grand speeches. No dramatic embrace. Just mutual understanding. Back in the court of public opinion, the debate continues for days. Was Whoopi too harsh? Wasn't too sensitive? Or was it exactly the kind of conversation daytime television rarely allows anymore? Unscripted, unresolved, real? But the truth of what happened can't be reduced to a headline. It was a collision, a reckoning, a reminder that strength doesn't always look like composure, and vulnerability doesn't always look like weakness. And maybe the most powerful part of the entire showdown wasn't the tension. It was the fact that neither woman walked away. Now we want to hear from you. Was Whoopi right to push? Was and brave to stay vulnerable? Or did you see something else entirely in that moment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it. And if you want more explosive, emotional deep dives into the moments Hollywood can't stop talking about, make sure you subscribe to Stage View right now. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to see it. Because sometimes the most unforgettable drama isn't scripted. It's real.